everyone. I've got a shocking statistic for you. DDI did a study of 15,000 leaders, and they discovered that leadership and empathy are directly related. Great leaders are empathetic. But here's what's more shocking. Only 40% of leaders were competent at the skill of empathy. So welcome, folks. We're going to be talking about the 6 secrets of being more empathetic. I'm Shawn Doyle, CEO of Shawn Doyle Training, author, speaker, training, executive coach. And this is Pamela.
Hello. I am Vice President of Learning and Development for Shawn Doyle Training, and I'm really excited to participate in this and share some thoughts.
Yeah, we're really excited today. I mean, empathy is such an important topic. And so this program is going to help you at work, and it's going to help you at home, because empathy is very much needed in this world. And if you want to be successful and motivated, empathy is a critically important part. So Pamela, let's start out with our tips. We're going to give 6 tips to our listening audience. So why don't you start out with tip number 1?
All right. As I roll into tip 1, I also want to define it a little bit deeper.
Oh, that's a good idea. Good idea.
So empathy is a competency, just to remind our listeners, that really rolls quite heavily into the science of emotional intelligence. And when I look at it, we're leaders at all levels. Of course we are, right, Shawn? And, it's regardless of what your job is, empathy is one of the most powerful leadership tools that's out there. And it truly is about the action of understanding, and being perhaps a little bit more sensitive to what people are experiencing. And I think when we talk about it and think about it, you get that old cliche, walk in my shoes, walk in my shoes. And just a quick note on that. I actually was teaching a grad seminar one time for a university and had a Chinese nationalist in my class. And after class, he came back to me and he said, one of the students had said, well, if he could just walk in my shoes, but he waited and he came afterwards and he mentioned that. And he said to me, why would I want to walk in her shoes? Her shoes don't fit me. And so and he laughed too, about it. So I'm good laughing, but it wouldn't be good empathy to laugh at somebody that didn't find fun within themselves. But he literally, it was such a wise insertion, because I think we do a lot of assuming, Shawn, we do. And we think we understand these things the same. But empathy is about relating. Yeah, as you described.
Pamela, it's such a great point. And I think what's scary or what's concerning for us is that, a lot of people say, well, my manager, my leader, the people that I report to, my teammates don't have any empathy. So what the great news is that if you do have empathy, or if you can develop empathy, people are going to be like, wow, you're really special, because most people don't do it, and you do it. That's going to separate you from everybody else as being a kind, compassionate, and caring person. So such an important skill in life.
Truly. It is. And, as I described to him that day, I said, empathy really isn't about walking in somebody's shoes as much as it is about walking beside somebody, right? Not over them, not in the other direction, but, in more of that supporting role. So tips about empathy. One of the things I like to do is kind of back into the concept by thinking about what empathy isn't. Okay. And so some of the tips I guess I would give is that, we spend a lot of time advising and educating. And is that not empathy? I think you have to be very careful as you do that you're not talking over people, right? And as you educate, you're not telling them almost an appointed, kind of a presence of the delivery. That is not empathy. And we do a lot of it in our roles as we advise and we educate. So just be aware of your tone of voice. Be aware of the kinds of examples that you provide, because it could come off as not being empathy.
So tip number 1 is what empathy isn't. And I think you're so right. Is, well, I talked to my person that reports to me, and I told them, here's what you need to do. I told them, and I'm like, but listening to your language, you told them, you didn't ask them. It was a monologue, not a dialogue. It was
Ooh, perfect.
dictation, not conversation. It's supposed to be a conversation. And so the goal in empathy is really to get that discussion going, not to tell them what they're doing. So that's a really good one. So tip number one is know what empathy isn't. Tip
Yes.
number two, identify common ground. Now, sometimes people say, well, what difference does that make? Well, the goal of empathy is to find out what we as humans have in common. You're like, well, does that work? I'm like, it works psychologically extremely well because now people can relate to you and you can relate to them because you have something in common. Let me give you an example. Pamela and I both do executive coaching, and she's a brilliant executive coach, and I love coaching, and we've been both doing it for a very long time. And I sometimes get assigned to coach someone who is reluctant because we coach people for one of two reasons. One reason is development, and another reason is there's a problem, and so they want us to fix the problem. And so I was coaching an executive who had some issues that they wanted to solve, and so when I first started working with him, he was like, I don't want to work with you. I don't want you to coach me. I don't want you to meet with me. And I was actually in his office. And I said, well, why is that? And as he was talking, I'm looking around the room and I see a poster of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers football team. And I said, once he stopped talking, I said, well, I got a question for you. He goes, yeah, what is it? I said, are you a fan of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? He goes, yeah, what's it to you? I said, well, as it turns out, that's my team. He said, really? I said, yeah, I lived in the Tampa Bay area when they started. Now, this led to 15 minutes of discussion about the origin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the ugly uniforms they started with, which are orange and white. Just a whole bunch of silly discussions. But after that, instant connection.
Bonding.
How silly. We're connecting over guys in tights turning around a leather ball. But it wasn't about that. It was like, okay, now at least you understand part of me. I'm a Tampa Bay Buccaneer fan. You're a Tampa, so you must understand me. So part of empathy is to try to discover what you have in common with the other person.
Yeah. It's about relatability. It truly is, and another tip I would give is as you deliver empathy, a lot of times I think about why leaders don't do empathy and, what kind of rolls into that. And one of the big reasons that I've heard from our coaching clients is vulnerability. And, if I'm vulnerable, they may take advantage of me. If they're coming to work late, let's give an example. If they're coming to work late, third day in a row, and it's causing stress on the team, and I pull them in for a conversation, if I'm not a little hard on them, then in fact, they're going to push back. And I reminded him how important, and the tip is how important it is to really get them to acknowledge, what has happened and to also have them come up with some solutions. So what does that look like? We need to talk. Tell me a little more about being late 3 times this week and, where are we at with that? And then you want to pause. And it's almost a painful pause. I literally find myself kindergarten counting on my hand on my lap till I get to 5 to 10 seconds, which doesn't seem like a lot, but when you're in that conversation, it's almost painful. And the reason you want to do that is you want them to fill that gap. And if they don't fill the gap, here comes the empathy, right? And so the empathy is tell me more about that. And then they start to tell you, and then you can say something like, I'm just so glad you shared. I really appreciate you telling me what's going on. Do another pause. And then you want them to tell you what they're going to do to fix it. If they don't say anything in 5 to 10 seconds, then you come back and you say, so what are your options? You want to brainstorm options? You want to, come to some conclusion here. I'm a good listener. But people have to own it. So empathy is about acknowledgement, not agreement. And that maybe is a huge key. We need to acknowledge what's happening here with somebody. Maybe they're struggling with personal life, daycare, cars, whatever it is. But at the same time, we're not going to agree with it's okay because we're running a business, right?
Yeah, so tip number three, that's just such a good one. Don't be afraid to be vulnerable. And I love what you said, Pamela. You said, well, use that pause.
Yes.
And the other thing that I love you said, which I always talk about often, is let's not give them the solutions. Let's ask them for the solutions. And the other thing is we might discover through that discussion, which you just mentioned, well, maybe they do have a car issue. Maybe they have a problem at home with their child or their husband, or maybe their mom's in the hospital with cancer. Who knows? But then that gives us an opportunity to express more empathy, to be like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry that's
the human to human pieces, right?
Yeah, I'm so sorry that's happening. Now, we're not excusing them. We're acknowledging it, right? They still have to be accountable, but we're acknowledging. So I love that tip number three about the vulnerability. Tip number four, in case folks are counting, is ask questions. The late, great Dr. Stephen Covey, who I just admired so much, read every one of his books and had a chance to meet him once. But, one of my favorite habits in the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, was seek first to understand, then to be understood. And so what you want to do if you're really being an empathetic person authentically is you want to ask open-ended questions like, well, gosh, seems like you're frustrated. Are you frustrated? Tell me a little bit more about that, or how did that feel, or what's going on? And, so all those questions are open-ended. You can't say yes or no. You have to then have a discussion. So ask those open-ended questions to find out what's going on, to find out how someone's feeling. I think that's so important.
One of the most valuable things you just said as you delivered that, Shawn, is you put "tell me" at the front of that question. And I can't emphasize, I have a background, a clinical background in mental health. And one of the things I learned in that practice, and certainly we utilized empathy as a consistent tool, but was always to kind of put the "tell me" out there and to follow up and add to what you said. Once they deliver, here's my next tip. Once they kind of deliver with the "tell me," what you want to do is you want to paraphrase, right? You want to be able to summarize what I heard you say. And Stephen Covey, what a wonderful individual. I actually had time to shadow him and got to know him personally. I spent 25 visits with Covey. Yeah. Fly out on a Sunday and walk around with him on a Monday and Tuesday. So I did that. I had 20 visits with him. So
what a great experience.
And he was so phenomenal. But one of the things that he said is not only tell me, but then as we summarize with this, we want to make sure that we come back with what I think I heard you say is. And that allows you permission to be wrong. Because sometimes if you were to come back and you're summarizing and you say, well, yeah, what I heard you say is they might do this to you. Which means, yeah, okay. And that's a very accommodating facial expression. I mean, it could mean agreement, but it might mean I heard you. But if you're able to say what I think I heard you say, it allows you to be wrong so that they can correct. And that's what you want.
So tip number 5 is to summarize and to use a phrase like what I think I heard you say. And I love the fact that we're doing that because now we're stating back what we thought they said. And sometimes somebody will say, no, that's not what I said at all. And you're like, oh, I'm sorry. Well, clarify, help me understand what I didn't understand. But it's also a gesture of empathy when you listened carefully enough to restate what you thought they said, which I think is a great tip. So that's tip number 5. Tip number 6, and by the way, stay tuned. We have 3 bonus tips for you. You do not want to miss. So make sure you stay tuned. Tip number 6 is empathy versus sympathy. Now, the way sympathy is defined is when you feel sorry for someone or pity for someone. And I've met a lot of people in my lifetime, and I've had a lot of people that I've met who were, suffering some sort of misfortune. And I've heard them say often, I don't want you to feel sorry for me. I don't want you to pity me. That's a horrible thing to do. Don't do that. Being empathetic, right, is certainly different, like we've already talked about. So they want you to have empathy, but they don't want you to have pity. I'll give you a great example. My daughter, who's now an adult, 30, 40. I don't know. It's funny. I guess you're getting older when you can't remember how old your daughter is. So she's 38, 39, 40, 41, something like that. But when she was in school in the sixth grade, teacher did something very remarkable, which I'm sure the school system didn't know about or didn't endorse. But she brought her son in to work one day, and her son was paralyzed from the neck down. Now imagine sixth graders. This kid comes in a wheelchair, and she said, "This is my son. Here's his name. He's paralyzed from the neck down. Here's what his life is like. Here's how it happened." And it was amazing because it led to a tremendous awareness on my daughter's behalf of people with disabilities. And I thought, what a brilliant teacher to teach empathy for somebody who has a disability. And what happened after that is every time my daughter met someone who was disabled, she said to them, "Hi, how are you?" Or "What's going on?" Or, greeted them if they were, which sometimes it would even squat down to be on their level. Mm-hmm. But what I loved about it is she wasn't condescending towards people with disabilities, because sometimes you see that. We have a friend who's in a wheelchair, and people go up and go, "Hello, how are you?" He's like, they talk to me like I'm not intelligent, right? Or they yell like, "How are you?" And he's like, I can hear. So the fact that this teacher taught her such a valuable life lesson was an incredibly brilliant teacher. So I'm glad that she learned that level of empathy.
Right. And when I think about the difference between those two things, we have to be careful that we don't go from empathy to sympathy. Yes. Because when we get into the sympathy component, sometimes the emotions can be so raw that people can't get back to empathy. And empathy is about being able to relate. Sympathy is an actual experience. And so, yeah, just, relating at that actual experience level.
I think I remember you, Pamela, telling me a story about that, about a friend of yours who had a loss. Can you share that? Because I think that's such a great concrete example of the difference between sympathy and empathy.
The short version of the story is this, and it was about a year ago, Shawn. One of my dearest, closest high school friends lost her father, and she was very close to her father, as I was to mine. And so I went to the service, and she was absolutely, her world was so rocked emotionally. And so I was there to support her in every possible way, which included, because we're very close friends, to sit with her and to let her cry. Anyway, a couple of months later, unbeknownst to me at that time, my father became sick and I lost my father. So it was about a 60, 70-day window of time. And so, of course, she came to my father's service to support me. And what happened in the service was her sympathy was so big and so personal and so raw, because she had lost her father, that when she came into the service, she was, you just couldn't support her. She sobbed, and she literally had to leave. And I found myself where I needed to be mourning my father and celebrating his life. I holding her up. And so that was, it was such an example to me later when I looked back and thought, here is over sympathy versus the ability to use some empathy and be there for somebody.
Yeah, boy, that's such a good point, because it's almost like the doctors, where they have kind of this disconnection from the patient.
Yeah.
Because let's say you're an oncologist, right, and the patient has cancer, and they want you to be strong and confident and clear and confident you can cure them. You don't want them to be upset and crying when they're meeting with you, because you're like, well, if she's upset, maybe I should be even more upset because she's so overly concerned about me, like crossing the line, if you will. So I think that's a really excellent point. Wow.
Yeah.
But now it's time for 3 bonus tips that you hung around because they're really valuable. So I'm going to give tip number 1, and then I'm going to go over to Pamela for tip number 2. So tip number 1 is practice it. Somebody says, well, how can I practice it? I'm like, well, practice it under the least, the least difficult circumstances, the ones that have the least risk. So, try it at home with your children, try it at home with your spouse, try it at home with your dog. But just practice empathy, because when you practice empathy, right, you get a little more comfortable with it, you get a little more artful with it. And so just practice it at home or with friends and family, where there's like a little less risk than it is at work. Now, I'm not suggesting that that's not also critically important. I would argue that you should be even more empathetic with your family and friends, but it's a good place to practice where there's not as much professional risk. So that would be tip number 1. Over to you, Pamela, for bonus tip number 2.
I would give a tip here or two around some of the challenges that you'll face when you do empathy. One of the big ones is, because our brain loves certainty, sometimes we have this bucket in our head, and things that kind of fall into similar patterns, we drop in that bucket. And in doing so, it becomes something of a stereotyped bias of sorts. So you can lose the authentic component when you utilize empathy if you're consistently, relating it to something you heard some other time from somebody else. And not that that's not helpful, but again, just be aware that you feel like, or I saw this before, or I know that feeling, or, don't stereotype it. Watch out for that.
Well, I love when people use the phrase, I know how you feel.
Yeah.
No, you don't.
Do you?
Stop.
That's a total cut, isn't it?
Do not say, I know how you feel. You don't. You can say, I certainly feel for you.
I can't imagine how you must feel.
Right. But don't say, I know how you feel. You do not know how another human being feels. And it might even be an exact same situation. With Pamela's situation, you could say, well, I lost my father. You lost your father. I know how you feel. No, you don't. You don't. Don't say that. That's a very dangerous term, because some people will say, and they won't necessarily express it, but they'll say in their head, no, they don't know how I feel.
It's very different to have somebody say, I can only imagine how difficult this day is for you.
Yes.
Versus the person that says, well, at least you still got your mom. And they think they're doing empathy. I'm sorry, it's absolutely not funny, but you look back at it later and you go, I can't believe they said that.
I know, it's crazy what people say. And I think, a lot of people have good intentions. Their intention is pure, but they're just uncomfortable with these adverse situations, so they don't know what to say. And I always say, if you don't know what to say, just say this: I am so sorry. That's it. Not to say anything else, just say, I'm so sorry. Right? And then you're good.
Yeah.
What would, I know people are waiting with anticipation. What would tip number 3 be, Pamela?
Number 3, I would say really manage yourself and be in the right mindset, because listening is kind of the foundation. So as I leave my last tip, I would say you really need to listen. And as you listen, you observe, right? And so you're observing the tone of the voice. If it's a face-to-face, it's the body language, which always says so much more than the physical words people utilize. And but be aware of that. Know that how important that tone is. And I would say less is more in empathy.
Well, that's well said. Well, thanks so much, everybody, for joining us. This is Shawn Doyle and Pamela Sumner. If you'd like to subscribe, please go to the bottom and subscribe to our channel, Jumpstart Your Motivation. For you to subscribe, because we're going to be.
Yeah, we go.
That's right. We got to point that's a rule, right? There's got to be a.
There we go. That's right. We're doing this piece.
Go below and subscribe. We love to share more videos with you. Every time a new video comes out, it'll come right to your box.
Powerful skill.
What's that?
I said a powerful skill set, empathy.
Oh, so powerful. And if you'd like to learn more, go to ShawnDoyleTraining.com. We'd love to help you with training or executive coaching, whatever your needs are. So make it a great day, and thanks so much for joining us. Take care.